Hello, friends, and welcome to today's episode. Rick is swimming in a lake near his grandfather's house when he sees something in the shallow water's shadows. He gets a group of friends together and looks into it, only to find out that it's his late grandpa's old car with a safe and all of the older man's secrets in the trunk. When Rick was a little boy, his grandfather took him and his younger brother Dan under his wing. Rick was a curious little boy with big blue eyes. In that same year, Cason's son and daughter-in-law died in a car accident, leaving their two young sons without parents. Cason was very lonely after losing his wife to cancer years before and then his beloved son and daughter-in-law in the crash. He thought that taking care of his grandkids would fill the hole in his life and mend his broken heart, and it did. Cason's whole life spun around Rick and Dan, who, by the way, weren't the best kids. Cason didn't treat them differently and loved them all the same. He even gave up some of his comforts to make sure his grandkids didn't miss out on anything. If only the older man had understood that his love for his grandkids wasn't enough, he could have saved them all from the bad times that were coming. Cason didn't notice that his grandkids hated each other and that it showed in their eyes and hearts. He didn't know that Rick and Dan couldn't stand each other, especially as they got older and became teenagers. Rick was older, always wanted things to be done his way, and never cared about what Dan wanted. Dan didn't talk things over with his older brother. Instead, he ignored him and yelled at him that it wasn't his place to tell him what to do. The two boys fought about everything, but even though they didn't agree, they cared about each other. When Dan fell and scraped his knees on the school field, Rick carried him to the school's medical room and stayed with him while the nurse put antiseptic on his knees. Ah! It hurts. Dan was crying as he reached out to grab Rick's hand. Hey, friend. Okay? Don't look there. Rick had said this as he held his hands out. I'll tell you a story, she said. Before Rick was done telling his story, Dan's cut had already been taken care of by the nurse. Even though Rick and Dan had their differences, they didn't want to hurt each other, so they helped each other out when they were in trouble. But as time went on, things changed, especially when Cason's health got worse. He couldn't be there for his grandchildren all the time, so the boys were often on their own, which made them grow apart. Cason gave the two boys neck chains one day to show how much he loved them. Boys, said Cason, always keep these with you. When I'm gone, you'll see how magical it is. It will bring you closer together than ever before. Rick laughed. I'm definitely old enough not to believe this magic crap, Grandpa, he yelled. Who knows? Dan might buy your story. Won't you, you idiot? I'm not stupid. Dan lost it. I'm a grown-up. I don't believe in magic, either. Oh, don't fight, boys. Cason said to calm things down. You might not know it's magic right now, but you will one day. Also, I would like it if my grandkids kept them because their grandpa gave them to them. Can you? Dan didn't know if the chain was special or not, but he thought he should keep it because he loved his grandfather. Rick threw it away and forgot about it in his closet. Grandpa thinks we're still kids, he told Dan as they lay in bed that night. I can't believe he got us those stupid chains. Dan didn't want to look like the dumb kid who thought magic was real. Still, he told Rick that he would always keep the chain. Stupid sore loser. Rick had a laugh. You are still young. Really? Then he turned away from Dan and fell asleep. Years went by. After high school, the two boys moved out of Cason's house. Dan got a grant to go to college, and after going to community college, Rick got a loan to start a small business. Both boys got busy with their lives after they moved out. Rick was thinking of ways to save his failing business while Dan was busy with tasks, projects, and trips. At that point, neither boy thought about their old grandfather, who was getting weaker and more lonely as time went on. Then one day, something unexpected came up. Cason went to live in heaven. Dan and Rick heard the bad news from Cason's neighbors over the phone. The boys ran to their grandfather's house, but when they got there, they saw that it was too late. Cason had left. Doctors said the man had a heart attack. The boys planned the funeral for their grandfather and said goodbye to him. Rick called Cason's lawyer after the funeral guests had left. Rick, being the greedy grandson that he was, wanted to know what Cason would leave him. When the lawyer said that Cason hadn't made a will, the young man was shocked. Rick, What has happened is sad. The lawyer said, I'm sorry. Kaysen wasn't just a customer. He was a good person who died too soon. Yeah, whatever, so, he never talked to you about anything, Will? Straight to the point, Rick asked. No, the lawyer sighed. Not as far as I know. I remember bringing it up once, but he said he wasn't in a hurry and didn't want to do it. Who would have thought something like this would happen? Rick put the phone down and slammed his hand down on the table. He asked, What the hell is going on? That old fool died without writing a will. Who will live in this house? Who gets his money and property? Dan said, Well, you can have Grandpa's house, I don't care. I'm going to move across the country. I found work. Oh, Dan, don't give that to me. Rick lost it. You're trying to be the bigger person here because you got that stupid job, aren't you? Making me the mean, selfish brother? Oh, Rick, come on. I have more important things to think about. Dan told us. Anyway, Grandpa would have wanted me to figure out how to live on my own. So, you can keep whatever you want. And, how much does this house cost? You'd probably spend more money fixing this piece of trash that's falling apart. Hey, I'll keep the house if you don't need it. You shouldn't argue about it later. But it's not like I'll die if I don't have Grandpa's money. I can also live on my own. I did. Rick told a lie. His business was about to go bankrupt, and he knew he would soon have to leave his expensive apartment in the city. Even though Kaysen's property wasn't worth much, he wanted it. Do what you can. Dan snarled. I'm going to leave tomorrow. Have fun with the money. Grandpa was a fool to waste our time. I was hoping he would leave us something, but it turns out he only has this house. The next day, Dan left, leaving Rick alone at Kaysen's house. He thought it was best that Dan didn't want the house because then he could use it for his business and avoid paying the high rent in the city. So, in a few days, Rick made all the necessary changes to Kaysen's house so that he could stay there comfortably and start running his business from there. It wasn't the best place to work, but at least he was making money. Rick went swimming in the lake near Kaysen's house one day. Kaysen took him and Dan to the lake a lot when they were kids, so Rick was just looking forward to taking it easy and swimming in peace. As he jumped into the cold water, he said, Wow, this is amazing. It was a nice break from the hot weather. Then, as he got closer to the deep of the lake, he saw something in the shadows. Rick kept swimming deeper and deeper until he saw a car buried in the shallow water. He looked around and saw that it was deep in the ground and would need help to get out. Rick swam back to the surface. As he got out of the water, he realized he had to get the car out because it wasn't just any model. It was his late grandfather's prized old Chevrolet, which had been in his family for years. Rick called some of his friends who owned car repair shops and told them what he had found. After an hour, a crane pulled the old, rusty, seaweed and algae-covered car out of the lake. Water poured out of the car's broken doors and cracked windshield. Rick's friend looked at the car as the crane brought it down to the ground. It looks like there's something in the trunk, he shouted as he hit the boot of the car with his wrench. You sure? Rick inquired. You don't have any tools or anything? It's stuck, said his friend. I did try. I guess I need to break it. Stay put. Rick said, I think I might have something. He looked around in Kaysen's old shed and found a toolbox with tools, screwdrivers, and claw bars in it. Rick and his friend were shocked when they forced the trunk open. Looks like it, mate, his friend told him. That's old. The key is needed. You've got it? No. Obviously not. But we have the resources to help. Rick yelled out. He used a crowbar to try to open it, eager to see what was inside, but the lock wouldn't budge. He then tried to open the lock with a drill, but it wouldn't even get through the finish. He gave up and sighed, Geez. What kind of metal was used to make this? The drill isn't even making a hole. Gotta take it somewhere, like to the locksmith. Best of luck. We're going out with my boys. Rick was left alone with the safe, and he didn't know how to open it until he remembered that Kaysen had given him and Dan chains when they were kids. The shape of the charm was like a key. Rick looked for the chain everywhere in the house, but he couldn't find it. Then he remembered seeing it around Dan's neck at the funeral for Kaysen. Dan had put it away. Right away, Rick called Dan. But Dan didn't answer the first few times, and when he did, he was angry. "Rick, what the hell is wrong with you? I'm going to a meeting." "Hey, look, I found something in Grandpa's car, okay? Don't forget that he gave us those stupid chains? He said it had some kind of magic. I think I understand what he meant." "So? What would you like?" "The rope. Do you still have it?" "Oh, so you now believe in Grandpa's magic?" Dan hissed. "Don't bother me. I have to go. So long." The phone line stopped working. Dan wouldn't answer the phone when Rick called, so he turned it off. Rick couldn't wait to get into the safe. What if it was filled with valuable things? He was in a situation where he needed money badly. But he didn't want to take the safe to a locksmith because that would cost him a lot of money. Also, there was a chance that the safe didn't have anything valuable in it. Rick saw that he had only one chance left. He chose to drive across the country to give the safe to Dan. The doorbell rang the next morning while Dan was eating breakfast. When he opened the door, his bigger brother was standing on the front steps holding the safe. "Rick, what the hell? Where are you going? Can I come inside?" As he ran past Dan and into the house with the safe, he yelled, "This is heavy." "I need the key," he said as he sat down on Dan's couch. "I'm talking about the chain. Now. You're not getting anything from me," Dan told us. "Get out of my house, please." "Well, if you won't give it to me when I ask for it." Rick slowly got to his feet and said, "I'll have to go get it myself." Rick went for Dan and pulled the chain off his neck. Then, he quickly put the key-shaped charm into the lock. The safe opened with a click. "You're nuts. What the heck is wrong with you?" Dan cried and rubbed his neck gently. Rick yelled, "OMG. Dan, take a look." He pulled out 2 thick bars of gold and what looked like a letter written by Kaysen. Rick and Dan started to read the letter, and as they got closer to the end, they both started to cry. "Dear Danny and Ricky, my lovely boys, I don't know where to start with this letter. Let's say I'm writing this because I love both of you. When you were very young, I took you both in. How much you both made me think of my son, your dad. Oh, I love you both so much. Sometimes I feel like I'm going to burst from all the love in my heart. But just recently, I saw something that really upset me. I didn't know that you guys were so mean to each other. I saw you two fighting, and it really broke my heart. I wanted you two to be there for each other while I was gone, and it broke my heart when I realized that wasn't going to happen. Besides the car my grandpa gave me, I only have the house and 2 gold bars. I wanted to leave the fortune to you too, but after seeing you fight like dogs, I thought you would be better off without it. After all, what grandfather would want to add fuel to the fire? So I asked a friend to take all my money and throw it in a river. If you have nothing in common, you won't fight. But I think you might find out the truth one day. If you ever read this letter, I want you to know that you, my grandkids, are my real prize. You are my darling boys. You are poor even if you have a lot of money if you don't have people who love and care about you. Boys, the real prize is your family. Enjoy it while you still can. I will love you forever. Your grandfather, Kaysen, with love." We did really hurt him, didn't we? Dan said as he wiped his eyes. "I apologize, Rick. Don't start fighting again. For the sake of Grandpa, let's put aside our differences." Rick didn't say anything. "Rick? Hey, before Dan could finish, Rick wrapped his arms around him, cried like a child, and told him how sad he felt. Rick cried because their parents had died and he was meant to take care of Dan, but he was so greedy that he only thought about himself. "Dan, I've been terrible. You ought to dislike me." Dan gave his brother a soft pat on the back. Hey, everything's fine. We can try again, right? You can always make things right." That day, the 2 boys got along again and understood that their grandfather only wanted them to be happy. The chains were magic, after all. Rick laughed and wiped his tears away. "I should have had faith. Later, Rick and Dan started a charity to help older people who are alone in Kaysen's name. It was their way of remembering their smart grandfather, who was the one who brought them all together. That's it for today, friends. Please let us know what you think about this story. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you soon for more amazing stories.